Sam,
Fred, welcome to Insanity.
welcome to Insanity. So it's Friday, which means I have shit to do. Like I got to go to shul tonight. It's Shabbat, bro. It's like,
Oh man.
Oh God, you
yeah. So
guys
we
are
only have a little bit of time to get.
you guys are freezing up on me here.
Uh-oh. Well, uh-oh. Let's see what's happening.
Uh-oh.
Have you got it now, Steve?
Yeah, you're fine now. I just that there was a second there where you kind of froze, and your audio levels are low. And funnily enough, at the top of my screen, I don't see my audio
Man,
icon. It seems to have disappeared.
Steve, we should have given you a little bit of a tutorial before you came on. I feel bad that we didn't show you how to use this technology properly.
So Fred, I get what you're saying is we basically have to tear through every detail of James Bond's history between now and whenever the hell you have to leave for Shabbat. Is that
Yeah, I got to leave
accurate?
for Shabbat. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got to get,
yeah.
and I'll probably be getting my tie and stuff on while we're talking because it's a matter of being properly dressed up for the synagogue.
So for
Guys, come on! I mean, what's more important, James Bond or God?
So for a good portion of our
point.
audience, who are dying to hear from the greatest James Bond expert in the world, they're going to have to hear it wrapped up pretty damn quickly so you can get to Shabbat. That's what you're saying.
Well, I am very good at speaking quickly.
All right. Well, listen, Steve, sorry for all the technical difficulties getting in and all that. And really, what's this story that we hear of you, James Bond, synonymous with each other? Like, what the hell? Who are you? What is this James Bond shit everyone talks about when your name comes up?
Well, it's a small group of guys, and every time I appear in the Zoom, I have the James Bond cover of my book, in back of me. So I'm naturally the Bond guy. It isn't the only thing I do. I write about.
I could do it too. I could put James Bond behind me. Why wouldn't that make me the James Bond guy? What makes you so special?
Because I was the first writer in the world to write a behind-the-scenes history of the James Bond films.
All right, now we're talking.
I got there first. I interviewed everybody back in the 70s, and then I wrote 2 editions of the James Bond films, a behind-the-scenes history, which was a very good seller. And then I was approached by Contemporary Books of Chicago to write the complete James Bond movie encyclopedia, because they had great success with Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe encyclopedias. So now I have my 4th edition of the James Bond movie encyclopedia, just came out last year, includes information on the latest James Bond movie. So we are up to date.
Wow. Steve, that reminds me of if that's like picking up cryptocurrency in the 70s or something. That's like really, how did you know that this shit was going to unfold as seriously as it has? And why are you on the front edge of this incredible, it's an incredible culture, a whole culture built around James Bond. It does fit in with Marilyn and with Elvis. It really does. It's not less or more. And how is it that you got in so early and then got to be the expert, the aficionado of all of James?
Well, I was the firstest with the mostest. I essentially, basically, mid-70s, film history was kind of a bit in its infancy in certain ways. This is before computers, before Blu-rays, before commentary tracks, behind-the-scenes documentaries, video press kits. I had cut my teeth by being a staff writer for a Chicago film magazine called Cine Fantastique, and I specialized in forensic historical analysis of classic films. I mean, for instance, I spent 6 months piecing together the history of the 1951 sci-fi classic, The Day the Earth Stood Still. I interviewed everybody. Wow. I found a lot of behind-the-scenes materials. Then I had published a book called Combat Films, American Realism, 1945 to 1970, which I showed to Cubby Broccoli, and I think I got him on a good day. I mean, for those of your listeners who don't know who that is, Cubby Broccoli, Albert R. Broccoli, is essentially the godfather of James Bond. He and Harry Saltzman acquired the rights to Ian Fleming's series back in 1961. So I got him on a good day, and I did a wonderful interview with Cubby, and he introduced me to his stepson, Michael Wilson. I went over to London in 77. I had total cooperation, and it was totally great. and then everything fell apart. But but actually, I got my book done. It came out in '81 and did well, and was updated in '83, and then the encyclopedia came along in '90. I kind of have always been around Bond, even though I don't get cooperation anymore, really. I kind of do everything on my own. I'm a maverick, and that's probably contributed to somewhat of my success. I'm not a studio flack promoting the Bond movies. I'm kind of an outsider. I review them in my book, and I give you kind of a capsule review. So I'm a little less kind for some of the Bond films because they're not all great.
Yeah.
So this, from my understanding, all started with a copy of the Goldfinger book being placed on your desk by your dad. Is that correct?
That's correct. My dad used to go on business trips and he would always be reading Westerns. And I had absolutely no interest in reading Westerns. I was getting my fill of TV Westerns. I had no interest in reading them. And then one day he came home and plopped this paperback on my desk with a nude blonde woman on the cover.
Whoa.
She was tastefully covered because, she's dressed in gold. I mean, et cetera. All her private parts were covered. But I was an 11-year-old kid. I'd never seen anything like that. I was a rather sheltered 11-year-old kid. I was an only child. We never talked about sex. We might as well talked about the men on the moon in my family. So
well, I should let you know, tonight's Friday night, and on Shabbat, you're supposed to have relations with your wife, and you just gave me some very fine ideas for tonight after shul. So I'm going to take care of this using that same sort of role play model with the gold thing. So thank you for that. I think it's great.
Just remember, though, what Sean Connery as James Bond said. If you're going to paint your girl gold, leave a small bare patch at the base of the spine so the skin can breathe.
So this could have just as easily been your dad bringing home a copy of Playboy, throwing it on your desk, and you turning into the Hugh Hefner encyclopedia expert. You could have gone that direction.
So insightful.
Just as easily. It really had to do with the chick on the cover of the book, didn't it?
Well, not only on the cover of the book, you crack open a James Bond novel and all of a sudden you're seeing words that you've never heard before. Like Fleming had excuse the female listeners, but I'll just be straight here. Basically, he always referred to women's fine breasts. First of all, I never heard anybody talk about breasts, period. He's talking about fine breasts, and every book has fine breasts, and the sex in the books was very chaste. It wasn't very salacious, but just the mention of body parts and the way women looked and their cleavage. Fleming was an out and out chauvinist and loved beautiful women. And he didn't hesitate to talk about them between the pages of his books.
Was this the only adjective he used? Was fine? Did he ever use silky or?
He uses the word magnificent, which I'd never seen associated with a female body part. I mean, frankly, when Honey Rider comes out of the water and Dr. No, I mean, the fact of the matter is she's naked, and Fleming says she covers her nose because it's been broken. Excuse me. She covers her private area, but her magnificent breasts just jut out. And that stays with you as an 11-year-old, an impressionable.
Dude, that's staying with me as a 63-year-old. Let me just tell you that. I'm right here with this shit.
Is Bond essentially Fleming's alter ego that he wished that he was? Is there any accuracy to this?
I think so. Ian Fleming is an interesting character in history. I mean, this is a guy who was a journalist back in the 30s. He cut his teeth covering a famous trial in Russia of some British engineers who I believe were arrested. And his terminology, his usage of words were quite famous in that time, the way he described the trial. So he was a very descriptive writer. And then World War II breaks out. He goes into naval intelligence. And he apparently was very close to Sir William Stevenson, who was privy to the whole ultra secret, the whole breaking of the German code and the Enigma machines. So he was right there in high levels of intelligence. And he was a bit of a spy master. He would send British intelligence operatives onto the continent to get involved in capers. So he really knew the spy game. And so when the war ended, he got a job with one of the major newspaper groups, and he insisted I guess he was a bit of a celebrity at the time, so he insisted on a 2-month vacation every year in Jamaica. And that's where he wrote his first novel in 1952. He was living at a place called Goldeneye, which, of course, became the name of a James Bond movie, but it was right down the road from Ocho Rios. And that's where Bond began, in Jamaica.
Wow.
Interesting.
That is interesting.
And I think that, he starts publishing in 52. He's trying to get a movie or a TV sale because in those days, that's where the big bucks were, because he wanted to have some money for his child. He had a son at that time. And there were kind of a few stops and starts. I mean, he sold the rights to CBS for a live TV program based on his first novel, Casino Royale, which starred Barry Nelson, the American actor, as James Bond as an American.
Really?
So that didn't quite take. It was a live TV thing. It's a little anachronistic watching it today, although technically Barry's the first Bond and Peter Lorre was the first villain. So then we move ahead a few years later.
Is that available? Can our viewers actually like pick that off on YouTube? Can you buy a bootleg copy
It's
of
all
that?
over the place. I think
That's
it's
so
even on
interesting.
some of the DVD releases of the James Bond movies. You can find that Casino Royale. The irony is, I didn't even know about this, and a collector came to me who had been going through some old film canisters. He thought he was watching the 1967 spoof of Casino Royale, which was done with Woody Allen and Peter Sellers, but the images were in black and white, and he realized he had happened upon a kinetoscope of that live television. It's not that good, but it is an interesting artifact. As I mentioned, there was a spoof of it. The reason there was a spoof of it is the film rights, as opposed to the TV rights, were sold to an actor named Gregory Ratoff in the 50s, who actually brought it to 20th Century Fox as a possible vehicle for a female James Bond played by Susan Hayward. So Bond might have been made with a woman at first, which would have been very, 21st century. That didn't take. He eventually, his rights were acquired by Charles Feldman, a top agent in Hollywood. He was kind of the Mike Ovitz of his day. And by then, Sean Connery was already under contract to Broccoli and Saltzman, his partner, so he couldn't get Connery. So that he realized that to compete with Bond would have been a waste. So they decided to do a big send-up of James Bond in 1967, which became the spoof with Woody Allen and Peter Sellers and Orson Welles and David Niven, which is bombastic and really not very good. I mean, every writer, there were like 7 writers and 5 directors, and I mean, Charles Feldman, the producer, was the best story because this is a guy who literally knew everyone in Hollywood. So if he knew they were traveling to Europe at that time, he threw them in the movie. I mean, there were wacky cameos all over the place. William Holden, George Raft, Jean-Paul Belmondo. It's a goofy thing. I think the best thing that came out of it was the famous song, The Look of Love by Dusty Springfield.
Oh, yeah, that's a great
which
song.
became a big hit. But it's funny because when I interviewed Broccoli, he was upset because that year they brought out the official James Bond movie, You Only Live Twice, which was the 5th James Bond film, which didn't do very well because everybody thought Casino Royale was their movie. So seeing 2 Bonds in the same year was not a good thing.
Wow, that is a lot of information. What else do you think about? Like, is there anything else that takes up any of your time ever, or are you just mostly 100% of the time working through Bond to get to real life?
10% Bond.
10%.
I'm a working screenwriter, producer in town. I'm a film historian. As Sam knows, I wrote an encyclopedia on the Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I was going to ask. That's what this was. This was a setup for that. So I hear you.
Yeah, no, the Twilight Zone originally terrified me when this is before the little paperback Goldfinger gets plopped on my desk. I think I was 8. I wandered into the living room. My parents were watching the Twilight Zone, an episode called The Silence, about a private club, and a guy wants to get this motor mouth to stop talking. So he bets him $500,000 he can't talk for a year. So they put this poor guy in a glass apartment in the basement, and basically he's monitored 24/7. And this is what the silence is. And I'll tell you, I looked at 10 minutes of that, and it totally freaked me out. I mean, an 8-year-old learning you can't talk for a year, forget it. So I was out of there. I didn't watch a Twilight Zone for another 20 years until they started coming up in reruns. And
Why
then
does that sound kind of fun to me? That sounds kind of enjoyable to me, to be put in a glass room and not have to talk for a year and actually make money doing it. I'm kind of, that sounds
You're
sort of
down with
appealing. Yeah, I'm down with that.
Well, remember, Sam, it's a Twilight Zone, so it doesn't quite work out that way. But the Twilight Zone, first of all, by in 1982, Mark Sacree, who is another writer, wrote the Twilight Zone Companion, which is a great little book, which has all the episodes listed, but he's more of a critic. He was writing more of a critical history. By the time we get to 2018, it was time for me to devote the same kind of energy I'd given Bond to the Twilight Zone by tracking down everybody I could find who was alive, and then putting together a formal encyclopedia, particularly highlighting the actors who were in the series, arguably the best cast of actors ever included in any series in the history of television.
Really? I didn't know that at all. So that's really interesting. So these are both shows that they were kind of taboo when I was growing up, both of them. Like I wasn't going to see, you only live once, you only live twice, it's called, right?
Remember the phrase, you only live twice, once when you're born and once when you look death in the face.
Wow. That's good. It's deep.
That's kind of shamanic, isn't it?
It's way out there.
Yeah.
It's what they call a Japanese haiku.
It is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It is. It is a haiku. Wow. Whew. Well, I know. Here's what I know. I know when I was 8 and that film came out, I wasn't going to be able to see it. It was one of those things. But I already knew who Ian Fleming was, and I already knew who James. I mean, that name had already rolled because my next door neighbor was into it a lot. And then Twilight Zone was the same thing. Whatever time it was on, that show, I think you and I have talked about that show and Outer Limits being, like totally scary. Like they would screw up not only my evening, but the next couple of days. If I even got a little wind of it, it'd be like, wow, that's just messed up. The music and Serling and all that. So
they were very smart because, first of all, Serling's producing partner decided they should base the series on the MGM lot and the backlots, arguably the largest backlots in the history of Hollywood. They had something like 5 backlots. So they didn't even have to go off the lot to find their locations, although they did go to the desert. And so they shoot it in black and white, which for my money today, once you put a Twilight Zone episode in color, you lose 50% of the atmosphere. When you're watching a black and white show like that, you're already in weird territory. Then the other thing I noticed in my research, because I watched all 156 episodes in a row, I wanted to get a real feeling for every episode.
Did you sleep? Placement. Did you sleep or eat or go to the restroom or anything like that?
No, I didn't watch them all in one day. I mean, I watched them over the course of 6 months, but product placement we take for granted today. They pull into a Chevron station, they're in McDonald's, they're drinking Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola signs everywhere. If you watch all 156 of these episodes, there are exactly 2 points in the whole 5 seasons where there's product placement. One is in the very first episode, which was the only episode not filmed on the MGM lot. It was shot at Universal. It's called Where Is Everybody with Earl Holliman. He walks past a gas station. There's a sign for an oil company. That oil company actually existed at that time. The only other reference in 156 episodes is somebody's wearing a Mickey Mouse watch. So literally in this show, you never saw anything familiar. You were already a little bit off the pace with the black and white photography, that creepy Bernard Herrmann music and all the other composers. This was a very, very carefully designed show. They've tried to replicate it 3 times, and I really don't think they get it.
So it's one thing to watch Bond or watch the Twilight Zone and say, man, I am really into this. This is such a cool series. I just love this. It's a whole other thing to devote a large portion of your life to continually dissecting every aspect of these huge series. Both of them. I mean, both of them so robust. We're not talking about the Back to the Future series. We're talking about a lot of films and a lot of shows. So what is that in you that is that differentiator between someone who's an avid fan and you? I mean, you clearly got into it with just ripping your teeth into it like you were biting into a steak, and you haven't stopped ever since then. And
A
I'm
straight
just
freak, Sam. He's a straight freak.
you're a straight freak. You're a
Straight
straight
up.
freak. Did you have any sense with either of these that this would turn into a lifelong objective to continue? I mean, does this just sort of, do you start out by sort of checking out a movie and writing about it, and then next thing you know, you've written about a couple, 3, 4. I mean, how does this turn into an entire life that continues on to this day?
Well, by the 70s, Bond is pretty established. And my previous book, the one I mentioned, Combat Films, American Realism, sold about 400 copies. And I said to myself that if I continue to write books that sell 400 copies, I will be working in a filling station soon.
Yeah.
So I bounced around trying to figure out a topic that would be a little bit more, have a little bit more longevity to it. James Bond. Now, when I happened upon this in the mid 70s, I had no idea that 40 years later we would still be doing Bond movies. It was very successful series, but who knew that a series would extend beyond 8, 10, 12 films? They're about to release the 25th movie. I mean, this is a series like no other. The Twilight Zone is always on. It's on in holidays. It's on at New Year's. There are marathons. These are subjects that stay in the cultural zeitgeist. And I think if you're going to write about films or television shows as a film historian, at least for my money, and I'm not saying I've made $1 million on this. This is certainly not my living. It's really been more of a side occupation for 40 years. I mean, for 30 of those years, I was a working film publicist in Hollywood. I promoted over 150 films and television shows. I worked the last 10 years with Showtime. So I had a day job. And I stopped doing that about 10 years ago. And now I focus entirely my efforts on actually making my own movies and television shows. I'm out there trying to sell every day. So even though I come across as a little bit of a Bond nut, I'm not really. I'm not. I've got other things in my life. But when I go on the radio or TV and talk about Bond, because I've been involved with it so long, I can speak from authority.
And I want to talk about your original projects that you're working on, but one more Bond question. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is, oh my God, there's another Bond movie coming up, I'm so excited, and 10 is, Jesus Christ, when is this going to be over? And you're wiping the sweat off your brow. Where do you fall on that scale?
Well, before Daniel Craig came on the scene in 2006, it was probably not very high. I thought that, the Roger Moore films were too funny for me, but they were spectacular, so they were fun.
Kind of cheesy.
I wasn't a Timothy Dalton fan, a little too serious. Pierce Brosnan was great, but the movies themselves kind of sucked. They weren't well written. Daniel Craig comes on the scene in 2006 in Casino Royale, and I became holy Christ. That is Bond. And since 2006, which is now, 15 years, he's really held the mantle very nicely. So I look forward to his films. And I certainly am really excited about the latest one, No Time to Die, which opens in October. So I would say I've come back to a high level of interest, for definitely the last 15 years.
Awesome. So what about your new stuff? Let's hear a little bit about what you're pushing TV and music now.
Well, I've made 5 films. I made my producing debut in 2002 on a baseball comedy called Bleacher Bums for Showtime, based on the great play about the Chicago Cubs fans rooting out there in right field. I did a World War II drama for the Hallmark Channel, which was honored. We were nominated for 4 Television Academy Awards. It's called Silent Night. Linda Hamilton played a German woman who hosted German and American combat troops on Christmas Eve 1944 during the middle of the Battle of the Bulge and maintained a truce for 12 hours. That was a movie called Silent Night. I also worked on a very, very important narrative film about suicide called My Suicide, with my good friend David Lee Miller, the filmmaker. We produced it together, and that won the Berlin Film Festival in '09 and 20 other great film festivals. It's on Netflix right now. It's a favorite of Ted Sarandos, and it has actually saved lives. Literally, kids on the edge who watched this movie came back and did not kill themselves. So the ultimate thrill for a filmmaker to get that done. But focusing the last 10 years, I've really started to focus on an area of Hollywood that needs some life support, and that's comedy. I think feature comedy has gotten to a very low fire. And
Oh boy, yeah.
I've got a good friend. His name is Billy Reback. He was one of the original writer-producers on the Tim Allen series, Home Improvement. He wrote for Murphy Brown and a lot of the Disney Channel shows. We are locked into a real creative blast of things we've been doing. We one of our favorites right now, we've taken the great courtroom drama 12 Angry Men, and we've written 12 Anxious Men, and it's a comedy spoof of 12 Angry Men. They're trying a case of a serial clown killer, and there's lots of skullduggery around. We're writing a Hollywood murder mystery. We've written 18 feature comedy specs and 9 pilots. So we've got a large inventory. But at the same time, I have another partner, David Miller, and we've written an animated screenplay called Mushi, the cat who lived with Anne Frank. And this is the story of the cat that actually lived in the attic with the famous diarist who leaves the attic and joins the Dutch animal resistance. The movie's a big metaphor for the fight against the Nazis, except in our story, the Nazis are the German Shepherds and Rottweilers that patrol the canals. So it's a lot of fun. It's kind of, as we describe it, it's a little bit of The Lion King and a little bit of Inglorious Bastards. So we sold it twice, but both companies went out of business. So we're in the process of getting out there. But it also was a children's picture book, which Penguin published last year. It's out there. It's called The Cat Who Lived with Anne Frank. Anne writes frequently about Mushi in her diary. And we decided that if Anne was still with us, that she would probably write a story about Mushi the cat. Because what did a cat think of these strange people who never go outside for 2 years, who tiptoe during the day? So it kind of provoked us to tell the story.
From a cat's perspective.
From a cat's perspective.
Exactly.
So you're talking about the problems of comedy these days. So this might be a chicken or an egg question. Which came first, a cultural shift in what people find funny, or a shift in what Hollywood produced in terms of comedy that then informed that cultural shift of what people find funny?
It's a very good question, Sam. It's a question we ask each other a lot.
Let's stop right there. That is just a freaking great question.
That's a great question.
That's a great question. I love it. So thanks for that.
When Hollywood started producing, particularly in television across a 500 channel universe, with all of this gamesmanship going on with video games and computer games and AI and all that kind of stuff, Hollywood, the studios started realizing that to get their stuff noticed, they had to make more noise. Things had to stand out more. And how do you make more noise? You get raunchy, because raunchy stuff gets a lot of attention. Now, when I was a publicist with the film studios back in the 80s, I was the publicist on Porky's 2. And Porky's 1 was the first studio movie to make $100 million as a comedy. And starting with Porky's and moving out from there, comedies started to get raunchier and raunchier, all the way up to the Hangover and those kinds of movies. I think the general feeling was it's not what people say, not the language that's important. It's what they do, and do things is more and more outrageous. And I think that the outrageous factor eventually became kind of one note, fart jokes, all the type of things that you associate with a lot of modern comedies. I mean, it's sad, but obviously Woody Allen is no longer in favor, and he was the master of language in his films. Albert Brooks was making these amazing comedies like Defending Your Life and Lost in America. He's now doing dramas. Steve Martin is on tour, mostly doing live shows. A lot of the key people in comedy are gone. So it's hard. It's very, very hard.
So there's something really interesting about this, because there's also this cultural sensitivity that is around political correctness these days. You mentioned Woody Allen, and I'd be surprised if we're not canceled just by saying the name Woody Allen on a podcast. But there's this cultural sensitivity around political correctness and so forth. And yet at the same time, as you say, some of these comedies are raunchier than ever. So how do you find that sweet spot in writing comedy these days that is sort of because comedy really has to kind of push an edge to a degree to be able to be funny. It has to be it's essential for it to be able to make us slightly uncomfortable in order for something to be funny. And yet at the same time, the raunchy and outrageous kind of just goes over the top and it's no longer funny. So how, as a writer, do you walk that fine line these days?
Well, we have our own personal taboos. We refuse to use the F word in every sentence.
Fred?
We refuse to just go for the cheap laugh. We work on our language. Language is very important to us. We're very sensitive about the world today. I mean, I was working on a drama script, forget about comedy, and my lead female character's name was Karen. I was informed by two executives that you cannot call a person Karen in any script now, because Karen has become a joke. It refers to a white woman who is clueless. And I said,
clueless and emotionally reactive, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
right.
I mean, I'm learning things all the time that we can't.
You're like a Karen? You're like a Karen? Or how does that work? How do you use that in a sentence, this Karen thing?
I think a Karen is, like we said, a clueless white woman.
But do I say, if my girlfriend was that, would I say she's such a Karen? Or
Yeah,
how would I?
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
It's a sort of a self-righteous sort of orientation, a woman with a self-righteous, total lack of self-awareness, and angry and reactive, basically. And
so now we will definitely be canceled by
we will be
both
canceled
Woody
now,
Allen and
now
Karen.
Twice. Woody Allen and Karen. Yeah, we will now be canceled twice for one episode. Yeah.
Well, just say whatever you want, because this thing's not getting aired. It doesn't really matter. Just rock on. The film's on the floor right now. Just done. So just
Here's another question we face every day. Am I allowed to write a story with black characters? Or is that only going to be somebody who's black who can write a story about black characters? Can I write a sitcom about Hispanics? I'm a white guy. There's a kind of a feeling these days about authenticity that you're not going to sell something unless you're authentic. My partner and I, who wrote The Cat Who Lived with Anne Frank, came up with a beautiful story about a Native American girl on an island, and we were informed that we cannot sell a story about a Native American girl because we're not Native American. It gets to be a little ridiculous.
right.
It's just, you just kind of truck on. I think that I don't quite understand it. I think everybody needs respect. I think that we're learning in Hollywood that every group of people, every minority needs to be treated like citizens. And we're learning after literally 100 years of filmmaking and TV that there's certain things they need to get their jobs, because it's still very much a white person's world in terms of the amount of jobs both in front of and behind the camera. And I completely get that. And I like the fact that there are so many shows now that are geared for all the ethnicities. I just think as writers, we just have to be sensitive to what's going on. It's tough. One of the projects I'm developing is the life story of Audie L. Murphy, who was the World War II veteran, the most decorated soldier in the history of the United States, and his story of how he came to Hollywood and became a movie star. He made 38 Westerns. And it's, he was a very damaged young man. It didn't look like it by looking at the cover of Life magazine. He looked like he was about 15 when he got out of the service as a lieutenant, but he was troubled by PTSD. So there's some major issues going on. We've got to tell the story with warts on, because it can't be a glorified look at Audie Murphy winning
No.
World War II. I don't think anybody wants to watch that. When you're doing biographical films today, you have to be authentic. You have to really tell the story with all the all the curves, because people want to see a real story.
Steve, there was a time right before this. So I'm really, I'm finding myself grieving a little bit about how hard you have to work to find the edge of being surprising enough to be honestly funny. And and all the many restrictions you have about not being able to cross cultures and not being able to use particular terms and being very sensitive to everyone's particular self-righteous needs and all of that. And that, there's such a thin razor's edge to be funny. But back in the day, our day anyways, I believe Sam was probably he's probably like in his latency years or something. We were looking at Sam Kinison, Andrew Dice Clay, Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor, even Bill Cosby. Like, these dudes had me cracking up until I pissed my pants every single time I would watch or listen to them. I would laugh even harder than Twilight Zone scared me. I would laugh for 2 flipping days after watching these guys. And those guys were just relentless on the edges. And they didn't need canned laughter to remind me that the shit that just came out of their mouth was just dead on hilarious. But that's not the way it is anymore. No one's really allowed to just like unload like that, to unload unyieldingly. When did this thing take place, this transformation?
Well, I certainly think there are a couple of cross currents we're dealing with. I mean, we're dealing with the Me Too generation, where all of a sudden all of these foibles, these horrible practices that have been going on in Hollywood for forever, have now been exposed. The post Harvey Weinstein world of, you can't treat people like that anymore. I think, that happened to one of our finest comics. I'm trying to remember his name, the one he's the one who was talked about masturbating into
Louis C.K.
Louis C.K., a hysterical comedian, really funny guy.
Oh yeah, one of the absolute best in the business.
Best in the business. And where is he right now? I haven't seen his name ever. You make mistakes like that. It's hard. I think that's one cross current. I think that I still think you can go into a comedy club, and when people can go into comedy clubs, remember we can't refer to the last 18 months as normal, but when people go back into comedy clubs, there will still be blue comics who tell things in a raunchy way. I think they're out there. But I think, as you point out, I think in mainstream television shows, they have to be careful now, because they can't make a lot of the same jokes they had before, because these TV networks are being watched like a hawk. Even with the world of James Bond, the James Bond movies have become less sexy and more violent, reflecting what happens in our media. I mean, it seems to me that people have no problem with people being machine gunned every 2 minutes, but the moment you show a bare bosom or somebody yells an F-bomb, they're crying for their sponsors. How could you support something like this? I think we're in a really crazy. I think in Yiddish the word is verkackte.
Verkackte is it?
Yeah. We're in that period where we're dealing with things that we've never had to deal with. And I'm sitting here in Los Angeles, and I don't know when you're going to air this, but it was announced the other day
we're not going to air it. It got canceled.
Okay, well, good. There are 4 million people in this city who aren't vaccinated. What does that say about the world we're living? What's going on here? I mean, it's very appropriate that I wrote the book on the Twilight Zone, because you know what? We are living it.
Yeah, we're living it.
Yeah. So I'm really curious. This whole cultural era that we are living in is something that I find endlessly fascinating and disturbing. And I wonder if it is a phase that we will move out of. I mean, I suppose all things are. Every era is an era that we eventually move out of. I hope these sort of restrictions on how we can speak and the types of terms that we can use and so forth aren't a permanent, rule book for how we have to interact as human beings. But as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking it's those comedians, it's those Sam Kinnisons, the Andrew Dice Clay, the George Carlins, the Bill Hicks, those people who just had that raw, sarcastic style to them. That Eddie Murphy. There was something that created a cultural glue between races that I think we were threatening that by attempting to sort of legislate what's okay and what's not okay. I think we threatened the very thing that actually created that bond between people. I mean, if I hear Richard Pryor, going off about white people, that makes me laugh and connect to him more than if we were, restricted about what we can actually say. So I think there's actually sort of as far as I can see, it stands to backfire versus create what I think the intention is to create more equity. I think more equity comes out of people being able to be sarcastic, make fun of ourselves, and make fun of each other.
Well, our country, has been founded on people having the freedom to say things. I think one of the freedoms that we most treasure is if you have an opinion in the United States and you express it, nobody's going to shoot you. I think that whole zeitgeist has been affected by the last 4 or 5 years in the political frame. I think people are hesitant to talk. Well, we certainly can't talk politics. We can't talk gender inequality in certain areas. I mean, people are hesitant to talk about how they feel because there's a great gap now between the sides. And until that gap is breached, and if we can start talking to each other, I think it affects everything. I'm not saying that you can't walk into a comedy club when comedy clubs open and there won't be a Carlin-like comedian doing exactly what you'd like to see him do. That probably is going to happen. But in the mainstream right now, I think we're all kind of watching and waiting to see where we're going. I think it's kind of a period in history where we've gotten really off track. And this country's been damaged. I know it's not damaged irreparably because I really believe in this country and what we could do. But we've got to start.
We could actually get aired now if we double back, if we take away the Woody Allen thing and the
Karen
thing. The fact that he just gave us such a nice piece of patriotic, stand that I think we could. If we do get canceled, let's just bring up this excerpt and show them.
We're gonna edit this so that it is all
right.
Basically, it's going to be 20% of the interview, and it's all going to be where Steve articulates himself in a very sensitive and intelligent manner.
Politically correct.
Everything else we're going to cut out.
Yeah. Also, could you add a soft soundtrack in the background of "Glory, Glory, Hallelujah"?
For sure, we could do that.
That really works.
Yeah, we could definitely do that. And since it's Shabbat and everything, we probably could put like the put the Shema in there or something every so often too. We could actually get this going in a way that I think we can make it work still. It's nip and tuck right now, so it's up to you.
Glory, glory, hallelujah, though. I think that
teacher hit me with a ruler.
That stands to maybe be a little too divisive. We don't want to have
the theme from the Jetsons.
Oh,
okay. Now you're
talking.
I love that theme. Sometimes I would turn on that show and only watch the theme and then get out to play again. Love that theme. Love it.
That's another thing that's disappeared from television that we love. Themes.
Yeah.
90% of the shows have no themes.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up on Gilligan's Island. Come on.
Yeah. She was hot,
Beverly
man.
Hillbillies.
Yeah.
Green Acres. Green Acres is
It's
the
the place
place
to
to
be.
be. Farm
Lawn
living
living
is
is
the
a
life
right
for
for
me.
me. Yeah, I know this one. Yeah.
Hey, you guys are very funny. Have you thought about doing a show together?
I love you. What is it? I love you back there, but give me Park Avenue. I love you what? I love
I
you,
love you. Whatever.
but give me Park Avenue.
Yeah.
That's in that song. Yep. Yeah, we're
The
pretty funny.
stores.
I get
The
funny.
chores.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Fresh air.
Yeah.
Times Square.
Yeah, that's right. Oh my God, Fresh Air, Times Square. That's so funny. Oh my
Exactly.
God.
I mean, who comes up with lyrics like that today? I was actually talking to a friend of mine. He was going down to a concert hall, and the group that was being featured is called the Shitty Boys. What does that say?
Wow. There's something about political correctness that makes what you do really interesting. And the fact that you stay funny and fresh and hopeful for the future is deeply inspiring. I don't know where I just pulled that off from, but I'm just saying though. I'm saying that's what I mean. That as an interviewer, it's up to me to refuel you at this point, and so that's what I'm doing.
Fred, the glass in my cabinet is always half full.
That's so
As
great.
bad as things get, I think back to my first James Bond movies and I remember my feeling, and it gives me a smile on my face. And, I move forward with positivity.
That's really great. And what's the future? What else is there for you to do? Or how does this affect your relationship outside of first of all, I don't even know that there is anything outside of Bond and Twilight Zone and movie making.
Well,
But
I'm in the process of rebranding myself a little bit. I'm actually going through a process inspired by metal, because metal is all about people who brand and rebrand and
yeah,
take on the world. I'm now going to
in
start
a
referring
heart-centered way.
heart-centered way.
Yeah.
I'm now going to start referring to myself as the classic film whisperer,
Oh,
because I really feel that we have many types of whisperers, but there hasn't been a classic film whisperer, and we have to keep the flame burning on all these great films from other eras that inspired people and made them better. And I think that I'm going to jump out there this Sunday night. I'm going to be on the radio on KBC 10 o'clock. Gary Meyer, one of our
oh yeah,
fellow metal
great.
guys,
Yeah, we
he's
know him.
starting a new show on KBC, 10
Yeah,
o'clock on Sunday nights. I'm his guest.
yeah.
I'm here on this week and next week. And next week, I unveil myself as the classic film whisperer.
Well, I have a problem with this. Is it possible that you're stepping on the toes of like John by doing that, stealing one of his words? John L. I mean, the pitch whisperer and the classic movie whispers a little bit. I would sue you if I was him, and I would probably win. Is there some concern about
No, because if the suit gets in the papers, it builds my brand. Suits are good. Suits can be
adversity?
good. Absolutely. Whenever there's attention gathering. However, if John wants to challenge my whisperer status, I don't mind just changing it to the classic film's shouter. I mean, whatever works.
That's
Well,
interesting.
this all started with the horse whisperer and the dog whisperer. So even John, as a pitch whisperer, I mean, it's still picking up on a trend.
You
that
used the
started-
word whisperer too recently, Sam. Didn't you have it in your name?
Hell Whisperer.
Yeah.
I managed to secure the domain name Hell Whisperer. Yeah.
Are you whispering about hell?
Well, I was just,
This is a pitch.
Fred and I were
pitch.
having a
Yeah.
conversation the other night.
Well
and
done.
I said, you know what? I know so goddamn much about living in a personal hell that I could be considered the Hell Whisperer. And he said, that's fantastic. So I looked up on GoDaddy and I found the URL Hell Whisperer, just in case I ever want to use it in the future.
Hell Whisperer. Yep.
$1.
It was $1. $1 on.
I think there's success to be had from whispering. I think it's just boring to call yourself an expert. It's kind of boring to say you're the maven. I think whisperer is a good little moniker, and I'm going to give it my best shot. I actually have a little thing I do on Facebook. You've probably seen it, Sam, because we're Facebook friends. I do Steve Rubin Saturday Night at the Movies every week, where I publish a little classic film review.
You know, my news feed doesn't feature you. I don't know why. I need to
Go
figure
on
out what's
Steve
going on there.
Yeah,
He's been culture censored.
He probably mentioned Karen in one of his videos.
But go to Steve Rubin's Saturday Night at the Movies and follow me, because I think you'll have fun with that.
I will.
And what I've discovered is that there are literally thousands of movies out there that no one's ever heard of that need to be whispered about. I mean, even Fred didn't know about the first Casino Royale. I whispered a little to him today, and now he's going to go check it out. I mean,
now I'll check it out and talk. I'll talk about it like I've known about it for 20 years, starting tomorrow. That's how I do that. Yeah.
It's funny. I am all about movies, and movies in many ways over my years have inspired me to just be the person I am. I learned so much from the movies, from the people who were in those movies and what they did, even more so probably than literary for me, because I've read books and I still love reading books, but I've gotten more out of the movies than most.
I've been really holding back from asking you a superlative question, a question like who's the best, or what's the best, or which one's your favorite. But I think I just got pushed over the edge right here. So I just need to ask you, like, what's your favorite? Is there such thing as Steve Rubin's favorite movie of all time?
Yes, it's called your Desert Island movie. It's the movie, if you're sent to a desert island, you're allowed to bring one movie to watch for the rest of your life. What is that movie?
Okay.
And drum roll, please.
Yeah, we'll give that. Sam?
Do you want to do a drum roll?
Okay.
The Great Escape, 1963. Steve McQueen, James Garner, Richard Attenborough.
And so tell us your relationship with this movie, because you were intimately involved with The Great Escape.
Oh,
I was, again, the first person to do a behind-the-scenes forensic history of it in my Combat Films book. I'm also the award-nominated commentator on the DVD release of the special feature edition. I've done 2 documentaries, the latest of which is called The Coolest Guy Movie Ever. And when I was 12 years old, right after my dad dropped that book on my desk, I was riding my little Stingray bicycle in Culver City on my way to a slot car track. I hear a voice, "Can you tell me where MGM Studios is?" And I look behind me, and it was Steve McQueen in a Ferrari.
In a Ferrari.
Get out of here.
Dude, that is just a crazy story.
Get out of here.
Most of what you've said up until now I'm with, but I'm not with that story at all.
True fact. And we had a conversation literally it lasted probably 15 seconds.
Dude.
And I remember every aspect. He literally asked me where I was headed. I said, "I'm going to race my slot car." He says, "I hear they have slot motorcycles now." I said, "Yeah, I heard that." I hadn't heard that. He could have said anything. He could have said they landed flying saucers in Washington today. I would have said, "Yeah, I heard that."
Yeah.
Steve McQueen. I mean, my God, talk about one of my idols.
He was already an idol, yeah? By the time you were 12.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I understand.
So, random question. If you were to cast Steve McQueen in any Bond movie as James Bond, as 007, what movie would it be?
Well, it's a bad question, Sam. I forgive you.
You give one or the other. He did so good with a couple of his questions.
Yeah, no, he's done beautifully. But Steve McQueen and James Bond are it has to be a Brit or an Australian or a New Zealander or an Irishman or a Welshman. You can't have an American James Bond. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, it was a shitty question.
There was one, though. The first Casino Royale had one.
Right.
I know that. I know that.
Very true.
Who doesn't know that?
By the way, twice they've tried to cast an American. John Gavin, our former ambassador to Mexico, was cast at one point, and then they brought Sean Connery in. And then James Brolin, who's known as Barbra Streisand's husband, he was also cast as James Bond. Both things didn't take. But Steve McQueen never really looked comfortable in a suit. I would never put him in a tuxedo. He was a sweatshirt and jeans kind of guy. So it just didn't work as Bond, Sam. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it was a bad question. worth it though. What was I? Oh, have you ever been granted some sort of special access to Bond films as they were being made as a result of your status here?
Well, my status at its high point was when I went to London in 1977. I drove out to Pinewood Studios in a Rolls Royce with Ken Adam, the production designer, and Michael G. Wilson, the producer's son. And we watched the first cut of The Spy Who Loved Me, which was the third Roger Moore film with Barbara Bach. And that was thrilling for me. I was probably the first American to see The Spy Who Loved Me.
That's awesome.
And that was fun. That was fun.
What is the
Oh, wait, before we go on, I want to ask, since you asked me the question.
Yeah, you're ready.
Sam, you get to take your DVD player to a desert island. You're allowed one movie. What movie do you bring with you?
Oh, God. What movie would that be?
And I'm going to ask you the same question, Fred.
I know. I'm already having trouble with it.
I'm more on the spot. Fred's getting a little bit longer to.
No, dude, it's not any easier. It's not easier.
You know what?
See, I live and breathe this stuff every day, so it's hard for me to ask you that suddenly out of the blue because you haven't been thinking about that lately.
Mm-hmm. You know, I might say the original Beverly Hills Cop.
Ah. Dun, 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 dun,
oh, that's that movie.
Yep.
That's good.
Yeah. I could see enjoying that over and over again, and even getting into that theme, and Eddie Murphy's just so perfect in that movie.
Oh yeah, he was so cool in that movie. Absolutely.
Yeah. Fred, what do you got?
Wow, I don't know. If I had to watch, my favorite movies are movies that I'm glad I saw one time that I'm afraid to see a second time. So it's like two different things. It's like, so I remember when I saw Clockwork Orange, it just threw me forever and totally changed my personality. I'm still walking on the backside of seeing.
Oh, that's what happened to you.
That at least a little bit.
That's what happened to you. Okay.
Yeah,
now things are beginning to make more sense.
But then Blue Velvet and Pulp Fiction did the same thing. They just turned me into complete toast. I was like completely into mush. I love both of those films so much. I love Blue Velvet. Blue Velvet. And then Pulp Fiction did the same thing. And then someone's echoing. Okay, I think it stopped. And then most recently, the Joker did the same thing. So Todd Phillips and Joaquin Phoenix's Joker set me way over the edge. I totally adored that movie, but it's not a movie that I want to stay on an island and have it hammer through my head every single day. I just love the movie.
No, it's true. I think you gotta pick something that is life affirming and upbeat. I think Great Escape obviously has kind of a tragic ending, but it ends on a high note, and that cast is a killer cast. I think that one thing that I find interesting about the movie business these days, because I'm such a collector of classic films, I have a good collection of DVDs and Blu-rays, is very little today I want to collect on. I think the one movie of the last 5 years that I really jumped all over with, because I just love it, is the new Tarantino, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
You like that one?
It was just so much fun. Just so much fun.
I could see why you like it. That was a difficult one for a lot of us Tarantino fans. I love Tarantino. I'm on the first day every time one of his movies come. And that one was a little bit different because it really did require a little understanding of the history of a few different things about Los Angeles or about filmmaking or about Manson or about, you had to know who Sharon Tate was a little bit. If you just show up, then that's a little bit of a harder film to sink your teeth into. But for someone like you who knew all those intricacies, that must have been really fun the way Quentin Tarantino juggled all the truths and the facts.
Also, the attention of detail in creating 1969 LA. I mean, I was right here. Mm-hmm. I had my first car. I bought a brand new Ford Mustang Fastback.
I had one of those.
We saved change for 2 years. Just show you how far that's been.
I had a 1971 green Mustang hatchback with louvers and the whole thing. A 351 Cleveland. I love that car.
There you go. There you go. So I was on Sunset Boulevard. I drove by the Whiskey, went by the Cinerama Dome. Ate at El Coyotes. I tell you, watching that movie, I'm halfway through the movie in the theater. I'm saying to myself, wait a second. This is such a lighthearted movie in so many ways.
Yeah.
How is this going to turn on itself?
Right.
And I think Tarantino just did a brilliant job.
Yeah,
Everybody contributed. I was so happy for Brad Pitt to get that Oscar. So he was so good.
he was so
He's
good.
the cool cat of today. To me, if you had to cast somebody, even though they make Leo, they did that little homage to The Great Escape where they made him Steve McQueen. I think even Brad Pitt would have done an even better job.
Hmm. Hmm. And Inglorious Bastards, where you brought that up earlier, is that another one of your favorites? Do you feel like that was a similar
I enjoy it. It's not one of my favorites. I would say now that Pulp Fiction and Hollywood are probably my favorites of his.
mhm,
But his films are always entertaining.
for sure.
This is a very unique filmmaker. I'm a little disheartened by the fact that he keeps saying he's going to retire and not make films anymore. That's a terrible injustice. I think we need to have Tarantino. We have so many, I should say, we have so few guarantees anymore of, even Spielberg, who I worship at his altar. Sometimes he does a stinker as well. So, you never guaranteed. And oh my God, Christopher Nolan. I love
Mm,
Christopher Nolan films. I absolutely hated Tenet.
mm,
I gave it a 0. I never
mm,
give films 0. So,
mm.
we don't have any guarantees anymore. And then, of course, we talked about the comedy movies. Where's the comedy? Hopefully, I'll sell a comedy and we can talk about my comedy or our comedy.
Well,
So,
did
are
Can
there any undeniably brilliant up and comers in the film world? I mean, you would know better than I. Just some young genius that you see coming in, maybe doing their first film that you've recently seen. Anyone that stands out?
There's some really remarkable filmmakers out there, but I'll tell you something, Sam. Everybody's doing dark films.
Yeah.
They're
Mm,
very, very serious. They're often depressing. I mean, the best
mm,
film this year, Nomadland, is a pretty depressing film if you stop to think about it.
right.
And I wish people would do a little more lighter fare. I think that after coming out of this pandemic, and hopefully we're out of it, people want something a little more fun. And I use that term a lot lately in trying to describe cinema. When was the last time you really saw a fun movie? And I'm not talking about the superhero movies, which are kind of designed as amusement park rides, but just a general movie that was fun. When the studios were cranking out movies in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, these were entertainment companies. And I would
Mhm.
say that the number of films that were depressing was almost 0. I think that they knew that they had to be light, they had to be adventurous, they had to take people away from their daily lives, whether it was the Depression or World War II or Vietnam. They wanted to make movies that really distracted people. I find that today's Hollywood, most of the filmmakers coming up make very serious and often depressing movies. Now, obviously, some of these movies have to be kind of sad and depressing because of subject matter. I mean, Judas and the Messiah, which was a very, very good film, is not a happy story about what's going on in Chicago. Neither was The Trial of the Seven, although I found The Trial of the Seven was a little bit more up tempo, etc. And I'm not saying that all movies have to be up tempo and fun, but I think we need more up tempo and fun movies.
Mhm.
The pharmaceutical industry should start sponsoring these movies. Sponsored by Lexapro. There's some potential here for them to work together. Might
we
as
already have
well.
too we already have too much collusion. I'm convinced that the gasoline companies and the cell phone companies are in collusion. The traffic is all designed to make you want to use your cell phone more and to buy more gasoline. It's all collusion. By the way, if you guys were offered a trip into space tomorrow, would you go?
Uh, I would check it out, but I am kind of the mind that people need to start exploring their inner space before
Oh
they
no.
explore outer space. That's what excites me more. Is Fred is just rubbing his head. Come on, don't you agree?
Sam, if you were offered a trip into your inner space, would you do that?
I always do. I mean, I
I
do
know.
that very frequently.
I know.
Absolutely,
And I have
absolutely.
something to talk to you about. I have something I want to sell you. Well, but we'll talk after the show.
There's probably a good chance that sometime in our remaining lifetime, and the three of us are not exactly 21 anymore, but I think we're going to probably put somebody on Mars. I think somebody's going to be crawling all around in that dust bowl. I'm not sure why. I, I'd rather explore a wormhole to get to one of these other solar systems with 12 Earth-like planets.
Yeah.
Why we're going to spend trillions of dollars to get to that rock called Mars?
Yeah.
You got to explain that to me.
Well,
I'd
something
like
about growing potatoes, I think. Isn't it something about growing potatoes as a way of eating or something like that?
Oh, glad you saw The Martian like I did. And he was growing potatoes because he had all that human feces to lay down on the ground.
Yeah.
I'd like to see if we could maybe vote for who gets to go to Mars. I mean, ideally, we could get rid of some of our favorite, or least favorite, I should say, people by just sending them to Mars.
That's
true, I can name 5 people right now I would ship to. Not Mars, maybe Uranus.
Who's anus? You talking about mine or Sam's? Because we already had a show that we talked about Sam's anus. And
that's true.
Talking about anuses, we're going to get canceled again.
We're already canceled, bro.
No, we can talk about anuses. We just can't talk about Karens and Woody Allen.
You can actually talk about farting and anuses in a handy.
That's all. That's fine.
Yeah, you're right about that.
See, we're going for the easy laughs again. We got to be tougher on ourselves. We got to use language.
Yeah, I would send some of those people to my anus too.
See, there you go.
Yeah.
This has been very enjoyable.
Check out my anus, mofo. That's Steve just sent you here like that. Yeah, that could be working.
I mean, if for argument's sake, we had a discovery the other day that we were able to get to one of those Earth-type planets in another star system, and you could go, I probably would consider that. I don't know if I want to spend 6 months in a tin can getting to Mars and just seeing a lot of dust. I actually was in the Jordanian desert 2 years ago, where they filmed.
Yeah, I was there with you. Remember, you know that me and you both had the same guide. We had Muhammad, or that or Muhammad.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, we had the same guide.
That.
We did.
Absolutely.
We had exactly the same guide. That's how Steve and I met. Steve and I met at the theater, and we started. Somehow we got to Israel, and then he said he went to Israel. And I said I had just gone to Israel, and then we went to Petra, and we were talking about going to Petra and Wadi Rum, and both of us had gone there. And then we started talking again. We had the same flipping guide. The exact same
Get out of here.
guide. Yep, exactly.
Get out of
here. They take
here.
you to a little area on the verge of this huge desert, and they break out the chicken and the vegetables, and you have a picnic on the verge of this great desert. It was just very surreal. Very surreal.
Yep, and we had the same freaking dinner. Exactly. I thought it was special too. And when Rubin says he's got his, I'm like, then I guess we were no big deal. We were just in the, in the throw of another day.
As special as you thought, but I had a blast. I definitely had a blast there.
So what were you saying? You were there in Jordan, and you were something about filming. You were the film.
Yeah, I mean, after looking at what the Martian surface looked like, at least in the movie,
for sure,
and realizing it's probably pretty close to what the surface really looks on Mars, I don't have any interest in going to Mars. I mean, it's not. We actually thought about writing a TV series about the first fast food franchise on Mars. The first McDonald's, but it just didn't sound like fun.
Can you imagine how goddamn bored you'd be there? I mean, what is there to do?
Well,
where would you go?
Vision Quest.
You go off on a vacation over to the other crater somewhere or whatever. It's all the goddamn same. There's no variety. What the hell would you do? You wouldn't do anything.
Well,
you would just have.
You have to get satellite access to internet. You have to get that so you can at least scroll through Facebook and see what's happening. No?
Exactly.
There would be so much porn consumption on Mars. There would just be an insane amount of porn consumption on Mars.
Well, the big question is whether Ken could have his feed on Mars.
Very good point.
He does it from Bali. Can he do it from Mars, which would be interesting. Well, by the way, do you think we're going to go back to a live in-person metal, or are we always going to be a Zoom metal?
I think Zoom is always going to play an important role in it from now on.
That's what I think too.
because we're international. We're very international. And for the listeners who don't realize it, the three of us are members of a group called Metal. It's not a cult. My son thinks it's a cult. It's not a cult.
No.
And it's a group of heart-centered men who get together on Saturday mornings and discuss issues of importance.
Yep, we're in that club together, indeed. And it's a great club, and it is it's what do you call it? It's almost like a self-vetted group of responsible, heart-centered men and
entrepreneurs
primarily.
Men
primarily
entrepreneurs.
Cannot be hired by anybody because we are just entrepreneurial,
unemployable, and
men, exactly.
often homeless even.
So we're gonna do a metal event. We're gonna get a bunch of us together to go see the James Bond movie, just like we did 6 years ago. It's hard to believe we did this in 2015 to see Spectre.
Wow.
Nice.
Steve, most of the time our show runs about an hour. We're a few minutes over that. And I think we could keep talking, and it's super cool topics. And I'd love to even learn so much more. And so maybe, as Ken says, can we get you back for a little bit of a longer time? You know how he says that to everyone who speaks on Saturday. Hey, really love what you're up to. Can we get you back where you can really have a little bit more time? And your answer is, of course you would come back.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm honored to be asked back. It's kind of like a second date.
Yeah, it is exactly like that. A little scary that way. And yeah. So how can people find you? How can people get in touch with you or follow you or write you or learn or read your books or, what should people do if they want to know a little bit more about Steve Rubin?
Okay, so to get the books, both the Twilight Zone Encyclopedia and the James Bond Movie Encyclopedia are available on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
The Bond book is probably still in the stores, but I think the best way to get one is on Amazon. And then reach out to Facebook identities. I have Steve Rubin, RBIN, where you can write to me on my Facebook page. And then I have Steve Rubin Saturday Night at the Movies, where I told you I do a film review every week. And then I also have the James Bond Movie Encyclopedia is another page where you can write to me via that. And I also have a LinkedIn reference, and I have Instagram is named after my film company, which is called Fast Carrier. So if you want to reach out to me on Instagram, it's at Fast Carrier. The reason I called my company Fast Carrier Pictures is in studying the history of World War II, Admiral Halsey's carrier task forces in the South Pacific were called Fast Carrier Task Forces. And I like that image for trying to navigate around Hollywood, which is often like going to war every day.
Wow. So Admiral Halsey is, when you say him, I just think of the Beatles song. Admiral Halsey couldn't get to sleep, so he had a butter pie and something like that. A butter pie. You know what I'm talking about? There's some sort of phrase about Admiral Halsey couldn't get to sleep, so he had a butter pie. What is that song? Sam, help me out. You know what song I'm talking about?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Steve, you know what I'm talking about, right?
I know, but I don't know the song. I love the Beatles, but I don't know that song.
Hands Across the Water. It's Hands Across the Water by Paul McCartney after the Beatles break up.
Okay.
Hands across the water.
Hands
across
the sky.
Wings? Was this
when
he was
Wings? With Linda. Yep,
okay.
With Linda.
Yeah.
And they had another song called Live and Let Die.
Live and Let Die.
Yeah.
They did. What a great way to wind up this one. Woo! Wow, we were out there a ways. Thanks for bringing that baby lassoed back into Earth. That's phenomenal. All right. Well, Steve, if you can give us your Facebook address again, you actually broke up when you were giving it. That would be really great.
My Facebook address is Steve Rubin, Rubin, and then I also have Steve Rubin Saturday Night at the Movies, and I have the James Bond Movie Encyclopedia.
Fabulous. Awesome. Sam,
all right.
Sam, help us out. Help us on the way out the door here.
Steve, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's a pleasure.
Your mind and your experience, I think we just scratched the surface of the potential, and I would love to chat with you more at some point soon. And then we can talk about what we're going to do on Mars.
Sounds good. Absolutely, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.